let's go off to the next question. Let's see what we got here. Yeah. All righty. So, okay, this is a good one, Sandeep. This one's for you. So, the question for the audience is, when running a large Kubernetes fleet, what are some of the challenges where traditional cloud security tools like CSPM missed the mark? I know you had talked briefly about this earlier. And then, secondarily is we talked about the immutable nature of container infrastructure a little bit earlier. So
Yeah,
how does this make it very, very, very different and very difficult for detection and response to occur effectively? Start with you, Sandeep.
absolutely, absolutely, Iman, really right. I think we touched upon this. CSPM tooling just doesn't understand Kubernetes specific concepts like service meshes and labels and namespaces and stuff like that, which is very very specific to Kubernetes, really, right? So while CSPM is really focused on looking, doing the configuration and compliance control checks at the cloud level, KSPM or Kubernetes Security Posture Management is what is needed to be really able to query that, Kubernetes API server using kubeconfig, or just to have some sort of a proxy there, get that really low-level sort of data about Kubernetes components itself, really, right? We talked about RBAC and EBS policies and stuff like that. That is something which traditionally has been outside the purview of CSPM, because it's in the house analogy, really, right? Again, it's essentially KSPM is, hey, can you enter from one room to another room? Is that egress policy allowed, for example, really? Whereas CSPM would talk about the house level policies, not the intra house or room level policies, which are there, really, right? So it's an absolutely essential, posture management that is required if you're running Kubernetes on cloud. CSPM is good, but it's not going to take care of some of these Kubernetes specific configurations and checks that you need to be compliant as well. I mean, this is not only about sort of hardening and misconfiguration for security. It is also about compliance. If you don't have that, you're probably not going to be compliant, really, right? So, uh, absolutely. Now, how coming to the second part, really, right? How does the
Wait, before you go to the second part, I think
okay?
you mentioned something that is a very charged word. People either hate or hate, which is compliance.
I know, right?
I
Yeah,
hate to say that publicly,
yeah,
but I deal with compliance all the time, and I have throughout my career. But compliance is also a very, very, very good thing. It's a very good thing, and believe me, like we tore up some floors in this house from the 1940s, and they didn't have any of the compliance requirements. Like typically, nowadays when you have plywood, you have a screw 4 inches, 4 inches, 4 inches. You kind of know where to pull out all your nails. This house had people just nailed wherever they wanted to. What did it do? Created, who knows how it affected the structure of the building? Who knows how it affected the time it took to remove these pieces of wood? This is the part of compliance. Compliance is there to set standards to make
yeah,
sure that we are ideally optimizing this in the most building things in the most secure and efficient and effective way.
yeah.
Um, you know, a lot of people and a lot of compliance professionals are still again struggling to wrap their heads around how to effectively build the right set of compliance requirements for Kubernetes environments. So this is an opportunity for you that I know you've taken, which is to really craft and define, you know, the best standards through your CSPM offering for people to have a baseline set of security, and maybe even eventually, I don't know if you have this today or not, but having it mapped to certain industries like financial services, like healthcare, HIPAA, PCI, everything.
Yeah.
How are you crafting the policies that help people be more compliant with their Kubernetes deployments?
Absolutely, Iman, really right. I think, and it all really starts with, extending or taking inspiration from the log, observability mapping to TTP discussion, really, right? All of these, or most of these compliances, that be it CIS, be it PCI DSS, be it HITRUST, HIPAA, you name it, really, right? I think we have to look at the controls defined therein as the standards that we work backwards from, right? What sort of compliance checks I need to be CIS compliant? Am I am I checking? Am I doing posture analysis of my Kubernetes cluster against those controls, really? If yes, and if I have my Kubernetes control cluster configured, I am CIS compliant now, really, in that sense, really, right? Similar thing applies to PCI DSS as well, really. And while a lot of controls and a lot of checks within these compliance are similar, there are a lot of them which are very different, really, right? So uh, at this point in time, in fact, we do this for CSPM as well as KSPM within Threat Mapper. It's part of the open source offering. This is table stakes. Everybody needs to be able to do this with just open source, So Threat Mapper does offer that. CSPM with 5 to 6 compliances like SIS, high trust HIPAA, and same thing applies to Kubernetes as well, KSPM. So we're doing that as part of open source as well. But idea essentially is to go back from the controls defined, what you need to do, how you need to configure to be called XYZ compliant, and then really run those checks against your Kubernetes clusters, right, or your cloud as well. That's something that we already do, Iman, as part of the open source.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I mean, these are totally unscripted questions that I'm throwing at you because, anyone who uses open source tooling, always wants to hear, the direction of the people behind it, the teams behind it. And you fostered so much community contributions to your products, and a lot of security practitioners are looking at you for the intel. So it's really awesome to hear how you're thinking about, every part of your offering, and also just how you're cultivating the feedback from your community. I'm sure you've got a lot of community contributions, and you're being really receptive to crowdsourcing a lot of the direction of your capabilities, which is invaluable for for a product like this.
Absolutely,
Um,
Iman. Yeah.
we're going to hand off the second question to Nick. Nick, tell me a little bit about why the ephemeral or immutable nature of container infrastructure affects DNR.
Well, it's just that the node pool is sized to the workload based on HPA, horizontal pod allocation scaling policy. So how big does the cluster need to be in terms of absolute node amount based on compute units being assigned to each node? Now, nodes are constantly resized depending on your HPA policies up and down. So let's say you have 16 nodes, at 12 PST at noon here in Santa Monica. And then at 12:10, you've downsized based on your HPA to less than that. Now you have 6. What happens with the logs from those that disappeared because they've been sized down and destroyed? This is the cattle mentality of infrastructure management, where it's created and destroyed, not the pet. The pet is where you care and groom after it, and take it to the pet doctor and so forth. So coming back to that analogy, we have to get this context of what's happening to those pods at all times, honestly, off of the pod into a place where we can act on it and determine if something bad is happening. I just want to share 2 examples. So for example, let's say a cluster is compromised and a malicious cron tab is created to then create new privileged containers by the attacker to basically persist access, right? This is a persistence vector. How do we catch that? Well, we need runtime monitoring on the changes to the cluster configuration to determine that new cron tab was introduced, right? Let's take another example. A new Docker container is created outside of the Kubernetes control plane, right? Can I, as an attacker, deploy a privileged container and start a new Docker container on the host VM? You will not catch that unless you have runtime monitoring, observability. These are just 2 examples of things that you can do with the Deepfence Threat Striker product, as well as the Falco product that we use at Snap as well for that. So you're basically going to lose this game unless you have the ability to runtime monitor what's happening in near real time, have performance streaming of logs off of the pods into a centralized aggregation plane like a SIEM, and then have very curated rule sets that quickly fire signals for your detection and response engineers or automation like a SOAR to take action. Without that, you're not going to be able to detect the things that I mentioned.
Yeah, I know a lot of folks are, a lot of people are buying SOAR. A lot of people are also hiring security engineers to just try to figure out ways to do automation outside of SOAR, because SOAR is just one component of the automation story. But in a way, and this probably might tee up our next question, but the need for automation is paramount for doing DNR in immutable environments. because as things occur, it's like, you know, you can't batch process things anymore. It has to be streaming, right? And as things occur, they also have to be sort of actioned on.
Watch the full webinar at deepfence.io/resources.